In the last lecture, we saw an issue in our application. So if I go back to our application, here you will notice that we are displaying the list of all the courses. Now currently if I click on the detail button, here we can see the details of the course, but you will notice that here we are making an API call in order to get the details of this course. But this course is already available in our store. So instead of reading the details of this course by making an API call to the backend, we can directly read it from the store. Right. In that way, we will avoid any unnecessary API calls to the backend. Only when the user directly comes to this page. So if he types this URL in the address bar and press enter, in that case, the application will be reloaded and all the state will be reset. So only at that time, the course details should be read from the backend. But here you will see that we have an error, and that error is because in the last lecture we commented this line. So what we were doing here is, if we are directly going to a course detail page at that time when the state is not reloaded, then we are reading the course detail and we were adding that course in the courses state. But since we commented this line, we are not seeing the course here. But now you will see, let's try to reload the page again. You can see the details has been fetched from the database, but we are not updating it properly. The reason for that is, here we have set this dispatch to false. So I will remove this. Let's save the changes now. Let's go back to our application, and now you will see the details of that course has been rendered here. Okay. But here what we can do is, instead of dispatching this read course success, which is going to completely override the courses state, what we can do is, if we are reading a course detail from the backend, we can simply add it to the state, right? So for example, if I directly come to this URL, by that time, my courses state should be empty. We should not have any entities. So for example, if I come here, you see, at that time, since we have read this course detail, it is being added in this entities. Before this course was loaded, this entities was empty. It did not have any items. So let's say if we have some items in this entities, so instead of entirely replacing it, now the problem here is, if I go back to the course, then we can only see one course. So for example, if I reload this courses page, again, it will read all the courses from the backend. So now we have 4 courses. Now if I select one course, it will show the details of that course, and it will also override the entities dictionary with the new data. So instead of doing it like this, instead of dispatching this read course success, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to dispatch create course success. Okay, and when I'm dispatching this create course success, here I'm going to pass a course object. And here we have an error. So what we can do is, we can set the type of this data as course. And here it should be an object and not an array. All right, with this, let's save the changes. Let's go back to our application. So now the Node.js course has been loaded. We have directly reached to this page. If I go to courses page, it will load all the courses. And now if I go to the details of this Angular course, it is loading the Angular course detail. And now if I click on this back to courses button, you will see that all the courses are still being displayed. Okay. And let's say if I go to this React course, and here if I reload the page, at that time, the course state will become empty. And here we will add this React course to the courses array, to this entities. Okay. And if I click on this back to course button, that React course can be shown. And you can also see that since the courses was not loaded, it has also reloaded all the courses. So now these things are working as expected. Now the problem is, let's go to network tab. So now all these courses are already loaded in this state. But still, if I go to the detail of one of the courses, in order to fetch the details of this course, it is going to make an API call. As you can see, it is making an API call. But instead of making an API call and fetching the details of this course from the backend, since all these courses are already available in the store, we want to read it from the store. So basically, if the courses state is available, if the details of a selected course is already available in the courses state, then instead of fetching the details of that courses from the backend, we want to get it from the NGRX store. For that, just like what we did in our previous lecture, for this read courses effect, we can do the same thing for this get courses by ID effect. But here I'm not going to do any changes in this get courses by ID effect because I also want to show you another way in which we can achieve the same thing. For now, let me retract this. And what I'll do is inside this app folder, I'm going to create a new folder. I'll call it as resolvers. So basically, we are going to create a route resolver. A route resolver is nothing but a function which gets executed before a route is activated. So if we want to execute some logic before a route is activated, we can write it inside a resolver function. Here I'm going to create a resolver called course detail, and the file name is going to be course detail.resolver.ts. Inside this, let's go ahead and let's create and export a function. I'm going to call this function as course detail resolver. Okay, and to create this function, I'm going to use arrow function syntax. And here, since we are creating a resolver, this course detail resolver, it should be of type resolve fn. Okay, and to use this resolve fn, we also need to import it from angular/router. And here we need to specify what type of data this resolver function is going to return. Here it is going to return a Boolean value. Now, in the previous versions of Angular, when you wanted to create a resolver, there was a resolve interface which you need to inherit for a service class in order to make it a resolver. But from Angular 16, the resolve interface has been deprecated. So instead of that, we use resolve fn. All right, now inside this function, first of all, I'm going to create few variables because here I want to use this ngrx store. So I'm going to create a variable where I'll say that the store is of type ngrx store, and Angular has to inject an instance of this store inside this file. So for that, I'm going to use inject function, which we need to import from angular/co. And there, let's specify the type as store. So this basically tells that inside this function, inject an instance of store class and assign it to the store variable. In the same way, I'm going to create course service. This is another variable which is going to be of type course service. Okay. And again, we want Angular to inject an instance of course service inside this file. So for that, I'm using inject method, and here I will specify course service. All right, we have these two variables which we actually need. Now what I'm going to do is, the first thing which we will do is we are going to use the store to select a selector. So here I want to select that selector which is going to give us the current route values. And for that, in this store, I have this router folder where we have router selector.ts. And here we have this selector called get route parameters, which will return us all the currently active route parameters. So I'm going to select this selector. For that, I'll say get route params, which we are going to select from route selector. And this is going to return us the current route parameters, right? So on that, let's use pipe operator. And what I want is when this observable, we know that this here, it is going to return us an observable. So when that observable returns the first value, I want to take that first value. Rest other values I want to ignore. I want to take the first value and I want to work with that. Now after taking the first emitted value, I'm going to use this switch map property, switch map operator. And this switch map operator, we know that this get route params, it is going to return us all the route parameters. So here let's specify a variable, let's call it params, and this params will receive all the route parameters from the currently active route. Now from that route parameter, we want to read the value of id route parameter. So here what I'll do, I'll create a variable, I'll call it as id, and here to read the id value, I'm going to use the params, and on that I'm going to specify the ID property name, and this is going to return us the ID route parameter. Okay. Now, once we have the ID route parameter, first we are going to check if the ID route parameter exists. If it does not exist, that means in the URL, we do not have this ID route parameter. So that means we are not in the detail page. In that case, we will simply return false from here. And remember that this switch map should return an observable. Okay. So from here, we are going to return false as an observable. For that, I'm going to use this off operator. And using this off operator, I'm going to return false as an observable. So this is the first thing. If ID route parameter does not exist, then we will simply return false from here. That means we are going to read the course detail from the API. And for that, we will write the logic in a bit. Now, if the ID route parameter exists, then, okay, let me also put comments here so that it will be easier for you to understand. So if ID route parameter does not exist, then return false. Otherwise, if the ID route parameter exists, then using that ID, we are going to find the codes in the router state. So for that, again, what we are going to do is we will say, first I'm going to use this return keyword, otherwise I'll forget it. And from here also, we need to use return keyword. Okay. So here, again, we will say store.dispatch. And now we want to select that course, actually not dispatch, it should be select because we want to select a course. We want to select a selector. Now, which selector do we want to select? We want to select that selector which is going to give us all the courses. So if I go to course selector, in this state we have course selector.ts, and there we have this get courses selector which is going to return us all the courses. And this is going to return us all the courses as an array and not as an entity. Remember that we are storing the courses state as an entity. But since we are using this select all method, it is going to return us all the courses as an array. So here I'm going to select get courses selector. Okay. And this is going to return us all the courses as an array. Let's use pipe operator. And inside that pipe operator, again, we will only take the first emitted value. Once we have the first emitted value, let's again use switch map. And this time we are going to get all the courses, right? This observable, this is going to return us all the courses. So from that courses, what we are going to do is we are going to check if courses dot length. We can check the length property. Maybe since we have reached here, that means we will have some courses. So we will directly check if in those courses we are going to find a course where course.id, okay, here we need to pass a callback function. Okay, so in that callback function, if c such that c.id is equal to this id, this find method will return us that course whose id matches this id which we have read from the route parameter. And if it finds a course like that, that means that course exists in the course state, right? So in that case, we will simply return true. So here in this case, course already exists in the store. So in that case, we will return true. And from here, we need to return value as an observable. So for that, I'm using the off operator because since here we are inside the switch method, from here we need to return an observable. All right, so this is the case when the ID is available. I mean, a course with that given ID is available in the store. But if a course with that given ID is not available in the store, then what we are going to do? We are going to read it from the backend. And for that, we are going to make an API call. So this else block will be executed if course does not exist in the store. All right. And what we are going to do here, from here again, we are going to call course service dot get course by ID. Here we are going to pass the ID which we have just calculated, this line. And on that, again, let's use pipe. From within this pipe, I'm going to use the map operator. This map operator is going to get the course object, which we have read from the backend if it was successful. So if we have successfully read the course detail from the backend, then this map operator will be executed. And to use it, we also need to import it from RxJS. Otherwise, if some error has occurred, in that case, we are going to use this catch error operator. To this also, we are going to pass a callback function, which will get the error object. And from within this catch error, we will simply return false as an observable, because from within this catch error also, we need to return an observable. So we are going to return this value false as an observable. But inside this map operator, what we are going to do, if we have successfully fetched the course detail, then we are again going to dispatch an action. So again here I'll say store.dispatch. And which action do we want to dispatch? Again, we want to dispatch create course action, create course success action. Okay. And when we are dispatching this action, we also need to pass the payload. So what is the payload here? Here we need to specify the course object, and the course object we have already read it from the database. So we are going to get it here. So here we will simply specify, we will simply extract all the properties from the course. Okay, and then we also need to add the ID property, because the course detail which we will receive from the Firebase, there we will not have an ID property, there we will have a key value pair. So I want to extract all the properties from the course object, and there I want to add an ID property with the ID value which we have read from the route parameter. And this should be it. So with this, if I save the changes, and also since we have created a resolver, okay, we have some error here. Let's see what is that. Okay, the reason why we have this error is because from within this map also, we need to return true. So here we'll say return true. Now here I'm not returning this value true as an observable, because this map method, it does not return an observable. With this, let's save the changes. Again, here we have created a resolver, but we also need to add this resolver in order to work. So now we are going to go to the course module.ts file where we are defining our routes. So there we have one of the routes as course/id route parameter, and there we are already using this connectwait route guard. Now here I'm going to add resolve. To this we need to assign an object, and here first we need to specify a property. I'll call it as course resolve or course resolver, and to this we are going to assign course detail resolver. Let's save the changes. Now the next thing which we need to do is we also have an effect get course by ID which runs whenever the router navigate changes, whenever this router navigate action is dispatched. So we are going to comment this action. We don't need it anymore. So with this, let's save the changes. Let's go back to our application. So the application has been loaded. Now let me clear the network tab here. So now since all the courses are loaded, whenever I go to the detail of a selected course, so for example, if I want to see the details of Node.js course, it should not make an API call. Instead, it should read it from the NGRX store. So you will see that no API call has been made and the details has been read from the NGRX store. If I click on this back to course button, again, no API call has been made and all this course list has been read from the NGRX store. If I go to the detail of this Angular course, again, it has been read from the NGRX store, and we are not making any API call in order to read the details of this course. But now, if I directly type this URL in the address bar and try to access it by reloading the page, in that case, it should read the details from the backend, and then it should show the details of the selected course. So that is also working. And if I go back to the courses, you will see that since the loaded property was false, it loaded all the courses from the database, from the backend. So now this application is perfect. It is implementing the state management as it is supposed to be. and everything is working as expected. And with this NGRX entity section is also finished. In the next section, we are going to learn about NGRX store, and that is going to be the last section of this course. This is all from this lecture. If you have any questions from this lecture, then feel free to ask it. Thank you for listening and have a great day.